Hi, I'm Mark Cleveland, and welcome to the Photographer Academy. And tonight we're joined by the amazing Edmondson son, and he's going to answer photography's biggest question for us during the wedding. So all the way from sunny Texas, I hope. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And it's nice and overcast over here, so it feels very much like I'm in London today. But the weather's beautiful, so what can we complain about?
Well, it can't be worse than it is, I promise you. Luke, anything you want to kind of touch on before we go live? You're going to talk a little bit about today's presentation, what's going to be going on?
Yeah, so the topic today is going to be answering photography's biggest question, which I'm going to position to you is it has a lot less to do with the how and what of photography, and it has a lot more to do with the why. Why is it that we do what it is that we do? Because if you can answer the why, everything else falls into place. Unfortunately, and it's very understandable, but when you're an aspiring photographer or you're at any place that you're starting to learn, you become consumed by these questions of how and what. How is somebody doing something? What is it that the settings are and so forth? And what we're going to walk through in this process is once you can start with the why, all that other stuff becomes secondary and it becomes self-evident.
Brilliant.
So again, topic of today is let's answer photography's biggest question. And like I said previously, we are a small boutique studio, and we probably are no different than you. And I think that's really important. Now, there may be some of y'all that are connecting today that are part of large studios that have an entire team and support network, but for the average person that's out there, I mean, you're trying to do it all. You're the business person, you're the marketer, you're the photographer, you're the janitor, and it's very nice to be able to hold the title of president of anything, but at the same time, if there's nobody underneath you, I mean, you're going to have to do all the work. And Dad and I are not the type that would want to speak much about ourselves. If you have questions about who we are and the photography that we do, just Google us. The information's out there. The thing that I would suggest to you is that when I go to things like this, my hope is that I can walk away with just one tangible thing that perhaps it's described for me, or the way that I like to think of it, is as a light bulb moment. It's that one little thing that all of a sudden I can put in my tool belt and be able to carry with me to every photo shoot I go to in the future. And so for some of you, that's going to happen today. Now, other times we go to conventions, and we go to seminars, we go to workshops, and we do different things like that, and it's almost like we become full of steroids, right? We get supercharged. We get so much information given to us so quickly that at the end of the day, we go back and we look at the copious amounts of notes that we have, and we can't even remember what we were talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to slow things down, and we're simply going to try and answer the most fundamental question, and that question ultimately is why. Now, there is a gentleman named Simon Sinek, and if you ever want to go hear his presentation on this, you can look on TED Talks and be able to find him. It's Simon Sinek, S-I-M-O-N-S-I-N-E-K. But basically what he does is he approaches this from the business perspective. And he says the mistake that most people make is they start with the what and the how, and then they get to the why. And photographers do this all the time, right? What is it that I need to shoot? Well, I need to shoot a portrait. How am I going to shoot it? Well, let's bring them into the studio, or maybe I'm going to use off-camera flash. Why am I shooting this? I don't really have a clear vision for it just yet. But let's just get in there and get started, and let's see what we capture, and something good will come of it. What you find is if you start with the why am I doing this? Well, let's make up a scenario. A gentleman is coming to the end of his life. He's trying to create a legacy for his family, what his values are. So we know why we want to capture this honoring portrait. How do we do that? Well, depending on how we want to depict him, now we know how we might want to light him. And what is it that's going to be incorporated in that photo? What are the different visual elements that add to the storytelling aspect? Well, all those things become fleshed out because we started with the premise of why. And so as we look at this thinking process, you'll notice that it's the great inspiring leaders amongst us that also use this same philosophy. There's a lot of people, in Simon's analogy, he talks about Apple, and you go, there's a lot of people that make MP3 players, but you'll buy it from Apple because they start first with the idea of it's innovation first, right? People who are why people are innovators. And clients, the masses, are drawn to people who innovate instead of people who simply react. And so I'm going to use this photo here to kind of walk you through this idea of the what, the why, and the how. Why is it that somebody should care about this particular image? Now, when you look at this and you see this photo, we can just simply say, what is it? Well, what it is it's just two people Clearly there's a girl that's being held. There's a telescope in her hand. There's a telescope looking out. There's some different visual elements that are part of this scene. If I only showed this picture to you and talked about what it is, would you want to buy it? If you were the family of this particular couple, would you want this in your home? Maybe, maybe not. If I can get you involved into the why this was taken, now all of a sudden it becomes something irreplaceable. It could be something that has to be on your walls. It's something that there's no longer a monetary value for it because it has emotional value, right? And most photographers, what we do is we flip it, right? We start with the what and the how. We start with what it is we do. I'm a portrait artist, and here's how I'm different. That doesn't captivate people's imaginations, right? What captivates our imaginations, if you can tell them why it is that you're a photographer. Why is it that you do the portraiture that you do, or the weddings that you do, or the commercial work, or the landscape, or whatever it is? Why? People are driven and connected to people who are inspired, and that helps unlock your sales potential. Okay, so there's this statement that comes across by Diane Arbus, and she basically says, I really believe that there are things that nobody would see if I didn't photograph them. Now let's shorten that statement and just simply say there are things that nobody would see if I didn't photograph them. Is that something that's going to inspire people? No, it's the fact that she says, I really believe it. I believe this. Now all of a sudden you want to see the world through her eyes because you know that she goes forth this effort, this energy, this prism that she views life. And in a literal sense, you think of it like this. Martin Luther King, he didn't say, I have a plan. He said, I have a dream. And in a day before social media, in a day before sort of email blasts that can happen and webinars and things like that, 250,000 people showed up in the mall in order to hear this speech by a man who had a dream. Whereas most of our politicians today, what do they focus on? I have a plan. Let me tell you what my plan is. Plans ultimately are uninspiring. People don't follow plans. People follow inspiration, right? So the fact that she's able to connect and say, I really believe there are things that nobody would see if I didn't photograph them. Now that makes me want to seek her out and to see what it is that she's done. And the beautiful thing about being a photographer is the fact that since we can believe things and we can be inspiring, we can also show. Right? We can show past evidence of work that we've done that gets people then on board with us for future things that we're going to do because we're all about learning and growth. Now, why? Why do we have to do this? Why do David and I do it? Well, I can answer that for us. David and I believe that the reason that we are photographers is simply so that we have a camera in our hand to have influence in other people's lives and love on others. That's why we are photographers. Now, some might say that isn't it about making money? Well, yes, money is a result, but that shouldn't be the why. Money comes because of the results of what it is that you do, right? Why is it that we are photographers? It is because we have an opportunity to go into the most vulnerable of situations with people, to have an audience with people that we would never have an audience with otherwise, simply because we come under the mask of being a photographer. And it gives us the ability to be on the inside with them, to relate to them, to connect with them, to help them. And we believe as well that our clients, they're not actually the ones who are going to own the work that we are creating for them. They are simply the custodians of it for future generations. And since we believe this, we're able to help them believe that. Right? If I'm going to take a beautiful portrait of you, yes, it's going to hang on your wall, but the people that are going to be fighting over it, the people that are going to want it hanging on their wall, that's the future generations. And you have an opportunity now to communicate your family's values, your family's love, your family's traditions, your family's history, whatever it is, within this particular piece of portraiture. And if we start with that premise, now all of a sudden how we're going to shoot them and then inviting them, which invitation, that's a key word. You invite people for opportunities. When you invite someone, that now gives them permission to accept or reject. And when they accept, they've bought into the idea. Now all of a sudden, your job is so much simpler and so much easier. So what we create is we are doing something that places something of value in their care, for their hands, for them to protect, for them to give. Of course, then you get into Ansel Adams, and he talks about his whole idea of, making a photograph is just, it's more than just the camera. You know, you're bringing everything that you've shot, everything that you've read, all the music that you've heard, and it's the people that you've loved, right? It has to come back to relationships on some level. And it doesn't matter if you're an aspiring photographer or if you're a seasoned photographer. If you're seasoned, you just have more of this to be able to reference. But if you're aspiring, you still have this, right? But it's all encompassing, and too often what happens is, as photographers, sometimes we get caught up in just the job at hand, and sometimes we have baggage that's going on inside of us that we have to check at the car door before we get out to start the photo shoot. We have to check it right before the client walks into our studio, because it doesn't matter what phone call you just had or whether you've eaten lunch or not. All that stuff has to be set aside, because if you are going to ask your clients to do something, which is to have feeling and emotion when they're being captured, you better be shooting from that same perspective. Right? You have to be matching their level of energy and their intensity. And I love the fact that Catherine Ann Porter, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, she talks about this idea of style, and there's all sorts of conversations that occur about finding your style. And what she basically boils it down to is this: your style isn't necessarily something that you just go out there and buy, right? Your style you have to work at, and ultimately it's an examination of your own being. So the first step in that is that you have to become still, which is very scary to some people. They don't want to do it. It's so much easier to be external than yourself than internal. And I'm not telling you to dwell in the internal. I'm just simply saying at some point you have to visit it. Who are you? What is your story? What is your unique voice? What is it that you have to say? How do you then take that and carry it forward to communicate that to others? And then ultimately, will that give you empathy when shooting? Because empathy is the most critical thing, not only in shooting, but it's also in selling, right? If you can say to a client with empathy, of course, absolutely, that's expensive, but look at the value of this. That's so much more compelling to them than just simply saying, well, yeah, it's beautiful work. You really should buy it. If you have empathy when you're shooting someone, Dad had this happen recently, where my dad had a stroke and he had lost some sight in one of his eye. And he had a young man who was having his portrait made who was partially blind. And for the first time, my dad sat down next to him and just talked with him and shared and said, you know what, I'm blind too. And you know what I sometimes realize? Many of us have sight, but few have vision. And the kid looked up with excitement in his eyes and said, I'm a man of vision. And he said, no adult has ever spoken to me in the way that you're speaking to me now. Now, that portrait that my dad was able to capture of him had an intimacy that would have been unavailable to someone that just simply said, sit here, turn your head, light this way, take the shot. Right? There has to be that level of engagement. You have to bring everything that is about you to each shoot. And as you go along in life, more and more of you is going to become self-evident. So now, we get to Anna Kupperberg, who has this powerful, powerful statement, and that's just simply this: my aesthetic gets simpler, and I rely less on gimmicks, and it's more about powerful concepts and powerful content. And in art, in everything we do, there's nothing wrong with having complexity. It's just have we organized the chaos? Does the complexity add to the impact of the image? And I love that word impact, because let's discuss it for just a second. Impact is both a noun and it's a verb, right? And as a noun, it's something that, it's talking about, it's the act of one body physically striking another, right? It's a collision of sorts. And we talk about that in photography, like if you're in print competition or anything, when somebody views it, like, is there an impact? Does it do something to them? Does it resonate on some level? And impact, it influences things around it. It could be influencing the ideology. It could be influencing concepts, technology, all sorts of different things that impact can create and shape. But as a verb, this is where it gets fun for me. As a verb, it's also the impression of two things colliding together. Like, it's when they're pressed firmly together. And I think of this, and this will come up later on in the program, but that is what happens when you go to an art gallery and you look at a painting, and for whatever reason you want to stop and allow 10 minutes of your life to go by as you just simply become engrossed within it, because that impact of the imagery, now what it's done is it's brought the two of you together, right? And there's always three things present in a painting, photograph, whatever, right? There's the art, there's the subject, and of course there's the viewer. And you're trying to communicate to that viewer. So now, let's go to this just for a little bit of levity. There are no bad pictures. It's just how your face looks sometimes. Mr. Abraham Lincoln, excuse me. And then we have this. Great photography is about depth of feeling and depth of field. Or it's more about depth of feeling than depth of field. Photographers in general get caught up in the how and the why. Excuse me, the how and the what. And what we really got to focus on is the why. We have to focus on that idea of feelings. It's where we've got to be when shooting. So here's where we're looking at it from. Instead of looking at it from the outside in, let's now frame everything so that we look at it from the inside out. And one of the things that's unique about the brain is that the way that our brain works is the outer ones could be the how and the what. That's the external part of our brain. That's the area that deals with language, right? That's where we have words. The why is something that's inside that brain, and we sometimes say, well, I have a gut feeling. I can't put it into words. And the reason we can't put it into words is because that part of our brain doesn't have the ability for language. Well, that why, that's where we want to be shooting. That's where we want to be feeling from. That's where we want to get our clients to go. And so when we think about it, Man Ray says, I'm more interested in inspiration than information. So now I'm going to show you this photo. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it was made, right? Well, how it was made is we went into a ballroom and we built the walls, we built the sets, we lit the shot. We took fabric and stretched it on the walls to kind of give the fake paneling. The picture in the background we ordered for $5 from China because you can do that so easily now. We got different propping to add to the elements of it and so forth. Does that mean anything? I'd say not. Well, what if we showed you how it was done? Well, here's your metadata. ISO 250, 11 different lights, auto white balance because it really didn't matter. F10 for our aperture. So some of you may be saying, that's great, can I see a lighting diagram? Because that's going to somehow tell me how it is that I can shoot that shot. Well, sure. This is from a iPhone photo, so I apologize for the graininess of it, but this is how it was shot, right? This is where all the lights went. Now, I can tell you that if you were trying to do this shot and you didn't know why you were doing it, it would be much more difficult to place all these lights in different places in order to be able to get the type of light we're looking for. We wanted to mix together cool tones and warm tones. Why is it? Well, because of the story behind this. Why are all the different elements present in this picture? It's because of the story behind this, right? And one of the most powerful things that you're trying to do is you're trying to have obviously strong subjects, strong compositions, decisive moments, light and mood, but most of all, it has to be emotional impact. And I apologize because in the technology of this webinar, this next part is going to be a judge who is listening or looking at this image for the first time, and I'm just going to paraphrase over it because the audio is not going to play what it is that she had to say. But her words do a much better job explaining how this picture resonates with someone than mine ever could. So here's what she says. She says, I've never done this before. I gave this 100 right out of the box. I'm like, oh my gosh, the impact on this is huge. Everything about this is just breathtaking. I can't wait to hear what everybody else has to say. Now that's how a judge looking at this, not knowing any of the background story, feels when they see this, which means we did a good job as a photographer, right? We made them feel. And so now let's really talk about what this photo is about. How hard was this concept to come up with? This photo wasn't very hard to come up with at all. It starts like this. There's a young girl, at the time she's 14 years old. When she was 13, I have this thing on my phone, it's called Do Not Disturb. And it's a wonderful thing to have on your phone. It means that if anybody calls you during that time, unless they're a member of your favorites, that phone call's not going to come through and you're going to be able to sleep. Well, that young girl was not in my favorites. And so she called me. And I didn't answer. Now, thankfully, one of the things that's been thought about is what if there is a case of an emergency? And so if you make 2 phone calls within the span of 3 minutes, that second phone call comes through. And so I got the second phone call, and that was my niece, and she was letting me know that she'd found her mother on the floor and that she was deceased. So I instantly sprang into action, calling 911, and then got in my car and Started a 20-minute drive up. As it turned out, my father had left the country to go visit one of my sisters over in Italy. And here she was all alone. And oh, the anguish that I felt when I realized that for that 66 seconds that she waited before she called me again, that she sat there alone and that not even her uncle was available for her. So when we started trying to think of what it was that we were going to do in order to memorialize my sister, we started with this premise of what are the things that are important to our family? Well, we know that we love Pride and Prejudice, and we love scenes. We know that we have the ability of building sets. We know that things like the Globe, we have a family that loves to travel. We're a family that loves art and sculptures. We love music. We introduce those elements. We're a family of faith. There's a Bible in the background. The painting that's on the back wall, that represents my sister who lives in Italy because of the fact that she's surrounded by so many beautiful paintings and couldn't be present. My youngest sister Lauren flew in to be able to be a part of the shoot. And when we first started with the idea, we were going to have my niece looking out into the sky, looking up into heaven to gaze upon her. And what we realized very quickly is that's not the story that we wanted to tell. That's not what we want to carry through with her in life, and that's not what we want her future children to know. What we wanted her to know is that as a family, we have her back, that she can rest securely in our arms, and that she does not need to look out for strength and comfort, that it's all right here with us. And starting with all of that why, we then knew how we wanted to build this set, and we knew what all needed to be in there. If we just simply had started with, let's start getting some items and see what's going to happen, we would have been there all day. So I encourage you, spend just as much time working on yourself as you do working on your craft. Because as photographers, we have to be able to feel and emote, and that's okay, in order to be able to pour out into other people's lives, right? If our cup is not full enough that it's overflowing for us to pour out to our clients' lives when they've gone through adversity, we won't be able to have the empathy with them. And at the same time, there will be moments of joy, and you want to be able to feel and truly express joy with them. So all of these things come into play. Now this next shot takes it into the wedding world. In this particular case, the why was very obvious to us because we knew that her father was an architect, and architecture was important to them. More importantly, the building we were going to be shooting in, he had designed with a famous architect, a guy named I.M. Pei. And of course, we did the requisite portraits of her that were the classic and the traditionals. But at the end of the day, we had to walk away with something that not only showed her and her beauty, but also showed the space. Because the why for them was their love of architecture. And if all we ever did was show tight shots, we would never have shown what it is that they valued as a family. And that's how this image came to be. Now, take that further, and you get to something like this. Let me just tell you a story along these lines. And my father, David, is tremendous when it comes to empathy, but he's also human. And we all have different points in life. This is a family that was dear to our family. Every family has people like this in their lives. If you have children, it's the family you grew up with. There was 3 children in this particular family that we grew up with that were corresponding in our age groups. Their father was coming to the end of his life. He had diabetes. He had done a long and difficult fight. The gentleman in purple had called my dad and said, "Hey, David, I don't think my dad's got much longer. You really should come by and see him." And at that particular time, my dad, he just said, my last memory of him, I just don't want it to be like that. And so I just don't think I'm in a right space to be able to visit him. And so he didn't. Well, he did pass away. And so now it became an opportunity to say, what is it that I can do to give back to this man who was a best friend of mine for almost 40 years? A family that we knew intimately well. The woman that's on the right that's holding the lute or whatever that is, she's the matriarch, and she is a brilliant concert pianist. The gentleman in the purple, he's now the eldest son. He's taking over the job of being the protector of the family. the two daughters, they're so good at teaching, they're so good at instruction. Now, if you went to a family and you simply said, okay, what do you want to do? Let's take a portrait of your family. How are we going to do it? All right, let me come up with this idea and try and pitch it to you without the value of why. There's no way you could get all these children to play the roles that they needed to play to focus long enough for what this ultimately is, which is simply a single capture. There's no compositing done in this particular photo. Now, it was all done within our 400 square foot studio over our garage. We built the set because we knew the why of what we wanted to do and where we wanted to place people, how it was that we wanted them to be teaching, instructing, and serving one another. It helped us be able to cast out exactly how the composition is going to work. And now using just simply the power of your voice in an entire space of 10 minutes to get everybody dressed up, to walk inside. They've all bought into the vision. They know why we're going to do this together. And in this decisive moment, this picture was clicked. And it becomes an heirloom for their family because it tells all of their stories and it honors the man that started it all for them, their father. Now this particular part here was going to be another judge talking about this. The essence of this particular commentary is essentially their reaction to the power of this many people being organized and brought together for one singular purpose. How is it that you could do that for a family? How can you convince somebody to do that? And their ultimate answer was it must have done a really effective job of explaining to them the why, the reason to buy into trying to do this. When we look at it again, the other things they commentate about is just the tenderness of the little girl's hand that's down there touching her mommy as her mommy is instructing her, the softness of one of them braiding another girl's hair, the pointing lines of the children playing the recorders pointing back towards the middle, the fact that two of them are looking off towards the light, but there's a balance in the fact that they're both looking versus one of them being disconnected. It's about the fathers on the side pointing back towards the matriarch of the family. All of these intentional elements coming together, even in a chaotic scene, to simplify it and refine it to its strength. That's the why. And so when we see people that know how to do stuff like this, we're drawn to people like that. It doesn't matter if it's in music, doesn't matter if it's in film, in art, in business. We are all inspired by people who have a strong sense of self, right? People that know how it is to communicate a vision, right? Just because somebody is a leader doesn't make them a leader. They're just in a leadership position. Sometimes it's the people in the lowest that get people to lead. People who are leaders are ones that can get other people to buy into a vision, and that vision has to be something, there has to be a safety to it, right? If you were to say I was going to make this photo, but in some way it was going to make fun of your father, there's no way they would have come together. It's the idea of the fact that this was done to honor them. That's why even these children participated. So now what can that look like? Well, when we're looking at art and we're trying to figure these things out, a lot of times it just starts with a sketch. It starts with a blueprint. This is where ideas happen. And as you go through it, we're going to do a whole talk on this when we're in London, but it's about this idea of being known by sight. How do you create work that's distinctive, that's instantly recognizable? And it's usually because of the fact that you're a creator. You're not an imitator. You're not duplicating what other people have done. And you're not an emulator. You're not trying to emulate being someone else, but it's not being true to yourself, right? You're a creator. And creation starts with ideas. And you start those ideas. In our case, what we use is we use a sketch pad. And we start putting them down. And a lot of times they're just very fast, quick, simple sketches. But ultimately, for whatever reason, some of those ideas start to percolate, right? Percolation is this idea. It's like you're having your coffee in the morning, right? Like you go start the process and you have to wait 5-10 minutes before all of a sudden it's fully realized. And it could sometimes take longer depending on what it is that's percolating around in your mind. Well, in this case, you take ideas, you sketch them out, you live with them for a bit. Eventually, perhaps something bubbles to the top. One of them resonates with you. You start taking that a little bit further. You start sketching in more detail. You start fleshing it out. This particular idea here was going to be a family of luthiers. Why is it? Because the violin is the closest thing to the human voice. And the message my father was trying to say in this particular image was going to be this. All of us have voices. Some of us are having to repair our voice. Some of us are having to construct our voice. Some of us are having to fine-tune our voice. And some of us have to play our voice. And luthiers, if you know much about their history, always worked in these very busy and chaotic scenes. It was full of clutter in their workspaces. And as you're building out your blueprints, you might even start casting different people. You might start figuring out, how am I going to problem solve my lighting diagrams? You solve it all in your head before you ever get people out there. And how is it realized? Well, it becomes something like this. So do you see it? We have a gentleman who's in the front. He's constructing. We have a woman to the side. She's repairing. We have a gentleman on the right. He's inspecting. We have a young lady in the back. She's fine-tuning. She's playing. All these different things are coming together to create impact within this scene. And I'll tell you one of the funny things about it, for anybody who knows anything about photography, the gentleman on the right is a dear friend of ours, a guy named Tony Corbell. He's a famous photographer and absolutely love him. Do you think Tony Corbell was going to just simply say, yes, I'll come be part of your photo shoot if we couldn't explain the why? No, he got the why. He said, absolutely, I'll be there. I'll change my busy schedule. I would love to just be a part of one of your photos, because he got our vision, right? And dogs were always a part of luthier families, and so we have the dog that's inside of there. And the way the set was built with that arch was built strategically. The why for it was so that we would be able to then have our lights be able to come in and be able to hit. Everything about this is intentional, and it works because of the fact that it started with the why. And so I'd say to you this, that once you're able to figure out those kind of things, then enjoy it. Enjoy the process. Keep going. Keep creating. Sometimes it's simple. This particular picture is one that doesn't involve a whole lot of extra lighting. It just requires extra thought. My sister Sarah is the brunette holding the book. Happens to be a 100-year-old Pride and Prejudice, which, if you know anything about Pride and Prejudice books, 100-year-old books are not that expensive. It's just more special that, it was something that was historical. My father recognized the fact that my sister Elaine, who's in the blue shawl, was making life decisions that ultimately were going to end tragically. Within all that, he said, I'd love to get one more picture of the three of them together as sisters, something that they could then latch onto and have for the rest of their life. So on the day before their wedding, and we're traveling from the States, so you got to figure out what it is that I can travel with, quickly and easily. Let's just get some white dresses. Let's get some shawls to be able to add a spot of color. Let's be able to bring these umbrellas, which were from the 1800s. They would all pack easily inside of a suitcase, and let's bring it all together. And so that's why we did this. We did this shot in order to be able to give these sisters something to remember. Now, the irony of it all is that their brother's not represented in this particular photo, but that's a separate subject. We tried one where I was in the background as a gardener, and it was much stronger as something that had just the girls together. And of course, my niece, we invited her to come and be a part of this, and so she's represented in it. The power of this photo for our family is the fact that this was the final photo that my dad did take that had all of the sisters together. Because as we've already looked at, we ended up having to take one later that represented the loss that we had of my sister Elaine. Now, life is not only about losses, it's also about joys. And we have such joy within our family. On the left-hand side is a portrait that I took of my wife and my daughter. And if you are a photographer like me, married to a woman who perhaps is not like you, and you hear this quite often, can we just take a normal photo? Can we just take something simple? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. Like, I'm so happy to serve. I'm so happy to do whatever is needed and so forth. But at the same time, if I'm going to give a legacy, not just to my wife, but to my daughter, who is too young to even fully grasp what it is that my hands have the ability to create, I just begged, please Please give me that opportunity to create something special for you. And so in the style of Vermeer, built this set, was able to do the lighting, knew how the lighting needed to be able to be. And Vermeer was chosen specifically because Vermeer was the one that worked with middle-class scenes and for the first time made painting accessible. It was no longer just for those that had. It was also becoming available for those that were that middle class. It was everyday life. And so bringing together my wife and my daughter, this picture is so special to me, to be able to have that moment of her just serving, bathing, loving, nurturing, all the qualities that I believe my wife so wonderfully and magnificently has. And on the right-hand side, the impact of that image was something that my sister, who later on had her own child, and a year later said, I so love that photo. I would love to create something like that again. Can we do that? And the answer, of course, was yes. So we changed the scene up. We lit it in a bit of a different style, but the message was the same. And the tonalities for it, why is it toned the way that it's toned? It's because we were already thinking of, she lives in this home from the 1600s in the center of Rome, and so we wanted something that would match the tones of her walls, that would feel native to that space. And so picturing how it needed to come together and the different propping and so forth, all that was easily painted within our eyes and our vision because we had a clear definition of why. And finally, sometimes the answer to why is just simply why not. This photo is a photo that we were testing. We were just getting ready for this opportunity to take a picture in the studio of a portrait. I needed a lighting stand-in. I asked my dad, Dad, can you just step in real quick so I can test my lighting? So he said, sure. So he stepped over there and he did what he did. And the irony was, a week before this, was it a week before this? It's 10 days before this. My father had married off my sister Sarah there in London, or excuse me, in England. And he had really wanted to lose weight, but he couldn't get motivated to do it. You ever have things like that? Like you really want to do it, but you just can't get motivated to do it? So I took this photo of him. And I came to work the following day and I made the coffee, which the coffee's always made in our house, and it wasn't made. And I said, oh, that's weird. So then I went up to my computer and I sat down at my computer and I started plugging in and I started doing all my email checking in and so forth, and then the beep went off on the coffee and I said, oh, Dad, the coffee's made. No response. Went and looked in his bed because we work from home and he's not in his bed, and I go, this is just weird. Like what is going on? And I heard a little bit of a sound coming from his bathroom floor. And sure enough, this photo represented for me the last photo I took of my father before his stroke. And at that time, I did not know what the outcome was going to be. All of these photos that you have seen of his, except for that picture of the sisters, are all things that we've done post his stroke. But he's had to relearn his skills. He's had to relearn his way to see. He's had to reteach himself Photoshop. He's had to go through that adversity, and he's so successful at it. He's an inspiration to me because of the fact that he shows me what can be done even in our weakness. And he is more fragile than he ever was. He is more passionate, though, and he sees the world with new eyes, even though he's lost some of the vision in one of them. So why do we shoot? We shoot because of the fact that we sometimes don't always know the answer. We don't know, and you hear the stories all the time. This picture that was taken, as bad a picture as it was, it's the only representation left of this particular person. We shoot because we have the gift of giving and honoring legacy to others. We shoot because of the fact that we can share the values, the life, in our family we'd even say the ministry of what this person, how they impacted and touched others because of the fact that we simply have a camera in our hands, and that's our excuse to love on others. So with that said, I don't know what kind of questions we may have. I simply would say we'd love to stay in touch with you. I know we're coming towards the end of our time. I'm trying to stay on task. We do have a website called adoptmedavid.com. If you'd like to get adopted by us, it's just simply a way for us to stay in touch with you. In any form of social media, it's typically either at David Edmonson or at Luke Edmonson, and you can find us on there. So thank you so much to the Photographer Academy. It's a privilege to have been here.
Wow, Luke, I'm almost in tears. Seriously. I have just absolutely, anybody who's thinking, why did you take a photograph, then You've just heard it. Absolutely bang on. Beautiful. We've got some questions here to kick off with anyway. Let me just
Yeah,
swap over to the screen, mate. But absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for that. And
absolutely.
the board has just lit up with thank yous anyway. But I'm going to go back to the beginning because right before we even got going, I think you must know this person anyway. But they were saying. Who would you say is the photographer that most has an impact on you now? David is obviously inspired by the Dutch masters, but what photographers would you say?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. I mean, the easy way to say it is, so we have the privilege of being in community, and I think we're all called to be in community, right? And whether it's coming over to be a part of SWPP or any of the other organizations that we're a part of, what we have found that's really important to us is we really want to get involved on their level, right? Like when we come to SWPP, we're not just coming as speakers. We also intentionally we're coming to apply for our fellowship, right? Because we want to show honor and respect to that organization, and we want to learn and grow from them. Now, you're asking me to try and just give you names, which I totally understand. There are so many that inspire us, and they inspire us because of their hearts. That's why they inspire us, more so than they do in their photography. Now, if you want specific names, at different seasons of our lives, when we first were trying to, our background is in commercial photography, and so there was a gentleman named True Red who predates most people, but he was my dad's first mentor, and he was the one who helped teach my dad the principles of commercial photography. And one of the things that has always stood out to us about what True did is he would never give my dad the answer, but he would never let him fail. So what would ultimately happen is people would, or my dad would come to him with a question, and True would look at him and say, well, David, I can think of 7 ways to solve that. Your job is just simply to find one. And then he might also give him work to do, which today in photography, copying is something that it's sometimes looked upon negatively, which I understand. However, there is an appropriate time for you to copy, and in True's case, what he would do is he would take a photo that he was using for his commercial clients, and then he would say to David, don't just, it might be a picture of a wine bottle. He wouldn't say, go take your own version of a wine bottle. He would say, here's the final print. Your job is to go in there into the studio and work at it until you can exactly duplicate what I did. And that was a much bigger challenge because it wasn't just at what point did it look good to David Edmonson. It was I need to now have to learn the skills in order to be able to put this kind of technique into my pocket to pull out at different times. Of course, as you move forward, when we got into weddings, one of the first people that inspired us in terms of who we thought was doing it well was Mike Cologne. Later on, we realized that there was more to it that we were looking for because for us, the focus really was on beauty. We have the privilege of being dear friends with a guy named Jerry Guionis, somebody that everybody knows his name. He shot my wedding. We were at his weddings. He shot my sister's wedding. We were able to do life together with Jerry, and so that's something that we love. But I see so many different photographers, working as a judge and so forth, whether it's the Asians, what they're doing. I mean, I don't want to cast it purely as like the Asian world, but in Malaysia and China, in Vietnam and Indonesia, they're doing so much creative work with the HDR type things in terms of their posing, and I see such growth coming out of them. When they first started entering the competitions, there was just refinements, final refinements that they were lacking, and they're getting it now, and that's inspiring to me. So hopefully that helps kind of answer, and I can go further, but that's enough on it, I guess. I'm sorry, Mark, but I don't hear you.
Oh, my fault. On mute
Yep.
button. Always a good idea to unmute yourself when you try to say something in life.
Sure.
So, obviously you're a photographer, but your pictures look like art. Why are the pictures more not like photographs?
Sure. Well, we started off like every photographer in terms of, I mean, you start by creating and capturing and so forth. And in our commercial world, there wasn't a lot of room for this self-expression, so to speak. Because of my dad's stroke and what we've had to go through in terms of this rebuilding process. And his journey is distinctive from mine. I'll go into that just a little bit here. But in his particular case, what he found was he had never given the appropriate amount of time and respect to the old masters, and that this was now his opportunity in his 60s to go back and revisit those. And so there's a connection to Or where did Vermeer come from? Well, my daughter's name happens to be Holland. So therefore, he first became interested in the Dutch masters. And we started trying to implement uh, the elements, the nuances of what a Dutch master would do. And coming from that, then my sister, who happens to live in Rome and is married to an Italian, Francesco, her husband, takes his daughter, which is very convenient, every Sunday on walks, and they walk around to all the different churches and they look at the Caravaggios. Well, Caravaggio had a uniquely different lighting style than what Vermeer had, and as Caravaggio kind of appeals. Vermeer used optic devices, let's say, in order to be able to do his painting, but Caravaggio used optic devices in order to focus his light. And the way that he lit was distinctly different. And so then we started moving into this Caravaggio type period, which was done to honor my sister's kind of what their environment is. And then most recently, my dad had met my sister over in England, of all places, in London, and he went to the National Gallery and was looking at all the different Rembrandts and basically said, oh, the Rembrandts now, like that's a direction that I want to be able to go and be able to see if I can master and do, and both do it in complex scenes and also do it in simplistic scenes. Do you light always the short side of the face, or is there times where you actually let the face go into shadow, and how do you do that and do it well? And then what kind of post-production is most befitting of this particular style. So in essence, all we're trying to do is just assemble things that go into our toolbox and go into our tool belt. And as you could have seen with that one bridal image, it had a bit of a painterly feel to it. Is everything we do like that? No. It's not. Our job is to serve our clients, and we have times where we have to shoot the expected, but they also want us to deliver the unexpected. And the reason they come to us, though, the reason people are drawn to us is because our work, it goes back to this idea of why. It stands out visually. They can't necessarily explain what it is, but when we tell them the why behind it, all of a sudden they buy in and they say, I want that for myself.
Full on. Brilliant.
Full on. Yep.
Yeah, full on, mate. How long does it take to plan a beautiful family shoot like some of the ones that you've been showing us, from the costumes to the decor, the makeup? What's the financial approach? Since it's difficult to know how much it is going to cost you at the very beginning, kind of thing. That's from Ali.
Absolutely. It's a great question. So the simplest answer is it could take literally as little as a day to as much as 2 weeks. Most of the time that you're going to be spending is, for us, we get all of our props off eBay. That's where we buy the props, the costuming and so forth. The beautiful thing about photography is you don't have to have the best version of something, you just need the representative version of something. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can reach out to your network and find out if somebody, like in the shot with the luthier family, the cello that's in there happened to be one that family of, that they really are luthiers, had in their vehicle, and we had one, and they said, well, we actually have one from the 1800s, would you rather have that one? And the answer was, absolutely, let's switch to that one, let's bring it in. But it starts with an idea. So like right now we're working on an idea that's an Egyptian theme, and we have some different ideas that we're fleshing out. You go out and you start sourcing the items that you need, however long that takes. You buy the stuff off eBay, or you get it from prop shops, or you do whatever. The building of the set, that's all done on paper beforehand. You sketch it out how it's going to be, because you have to figure out how are you going to build it in a way that's going to leave room for light. Or in that shot of the group, we knew that we only had 400 square feet to work in, and so we had a certain amount of space, so we needed to put an arch on the left-hand side in order to give the two gentlemen over there room to be and still have the table, so that they could be slightly out of the frame but still present within the image. And if we just had a wall there, it wouldn't have worked. And so so you think those things through. The ability of the sets, they're very easy. I mean, you basically just clamp on the back, you do your painting job or whatever it is that you're going to do, put up your wallpaper, build a fireplace, like whatever it is. It's just set building, and then you light it. And when you light it, what you start with is mannequins, because that way you're not asking your clients to be in there for a long period of time. You place your mannequins in each different area. We use a variety of different types of lights. Sometimes we use strobe, sometimes we use continuous. It's all based off of the quality of the light that we want, not necessarily, and sometimes you have a quantity issue, but mostly it's about the quality. And use whatever types of modifiers you need in order to shape the light to hit the areas that you want to draw attention to, and let the other areas, go darker. And when it comes to the actual shooting time typically for us is 10 to 15 minutes. That's the entirety of it. And our challenge and goal, it's not that compositing is bad. Nothing wrong with compositing. Full on, happy for compositing. We just happen to have the to know how to do it without compositing. And so the challenge for us is always, can we get this in just a single click?
Brilliant. How long does it take to build the sets? And have you got any advice on how to start to learn how to build these kind of sets that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, building a set it could take as little as an hour. It could take as little as, or I mean, as much as a week. It depends on if you have the tools already put together. Once you build your panels, which are just very simple, you just get some 4x8 sheets of masonite or whatever you want. It's just something that's sturdy or has the texture that you want. You build a frame about it and you start clamping it together. You can then arrange them however you want. The beautiful thing about trying to do arches is if you do masonite, you can bend that masonite, which is how we do our arches, to be able to create those shapes and then be able to give yourself some opportunity to be able to light and so forth. But you know, when we did the shot in our class that we were doing it, that was the shot of my niece being held by and with the telescopes and so forth. That one took our class, I think, maybe 6 hours to actually get it all built, stretch the skins on there, because that's just fabric skins that you buy from China to make the fake walls, and you're done. But it all has to start with a vision. And once you have a vision, it's very easy to put it together. If you don't have the vision to begin with, then you spend all day trying to figure out, well, what could we do? What about this? What about that? And you just spin your wheels.
It's like a decorator, isn't it? You know, it's all
Yeah.
in the preparation. Otherwise, you don't get the good top coat.
Yep, exactly.
Yep, brilliant. What would be the three main things? This is on the. Sorry, it's right on the. Telling you,
Sure.
you know, tell me three things now, okay? What would be the three main things that you would suggest to think about as to why to take any image? Well, that's a big one. Sorry, Luke.
Yep. So the three main things is to think about as far as why to take that image. Okay, so let's just use a human subject first, just to make it simple, okay? So why is that person in front of your camera important? Is it for a commercial reason, like you're needing to communicate a message, or do something, you know, in the commercial world, our job is simply to take something that's so compelling that it stops somebody long enough to read the copy, right? The message is going to be in whatever the copy is of the story or whatever. So you're trying to think of something that is dramatic, has enough impact that gets somebody to stop when they're turning the page. Now, if you took it from the commercial realm into portraiture, now all of a sudden you're thinking, what is it that makes this person unique? Everybody is unique. Now, how is it that I can best tell that story? And the number one way to start doing that and open your brain up is when you shoot with empathy and you start placing yourself in the mindset of, it's no longer what does Luke Edmonson think of this person? How does their mother view him? How does their father? How do their children? How does his best friend? Right? The emotive qualities you're going to look for in the way you may light, style, or direct them all are going to come from different places once you've identified for yourself what perspective, viewpoint that you're going to bring it to. And what happens is too many times as a photographer, we just get boxed into this ego thing of ourselves. Like I create, I do this thing, like I'm so wonderful. And eventually you run into the limitations of what you are capable of. You break free of those limitations when you start placing yourself. It's this idea of submission, which is never a fun thing, but you basically submit yourself to an authority higher than yourself. And in this case, the authority higher than yourself is who is the intended audience. If I'm capturing a portrait of a grandfather for his grandchild, how do I want future people to see what a grandfather's love looks like? That's distinctly different than if he's capturing that moment for his alien wife. But he knows he's going to go before her, and he wants her to know his love, like the emotive quality in the eyes. So it's about the intended audience is kind of where you kind of start with on why it is that you're going to shoot them in the way that you do it. And that's true whether you're doing landscapes or architecture or whatever. I mean, you're always trying to think about, like, why should I get there for morning light or why should I get there for evening light? Why should I include people in the subject or in the foreground in order to provide framing or anything like that? Or why should this just be about the staticness of the art? If I was shooting a building for an architect where it's about the work that they created, you simplify that scene and you make it in a way that it's all about the impact of their artistry. And if I'm shooting it to promote something that, let's say it was a mall that you're trying to get people to go to, don't you know you need a bunch of people coming in there making it look like it's the place to be seen, and the architecture itself becomes secondary. It becomes more about the experience. So you asked for three things, is that correct?
I think that's about
Yeah.
400 things there, honestly.
Okay. I'm just trying to answer.
No, it's brilliant, Luke, honestly, mate. Loads of, in a word, thank you, amazing, best ever seminar, Best webinar for a while. Amazing, thanks. So I can't read them all out because we'll be here till tomorrow anyway, but brilliant, mate. Okay, so another the question. Your photos look like paintings.
Yep.
Any tips within Photoshop of actually how to get this kind of look and feel?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is number one, you can do painting in Photoshop. So there's whole things that you can do just in terms of painting in Photoshop to learn how to do it. Of course, you can also use Painter if you want to go that particular route. We don't use any of those. We use we do some painting in Photoshop, but mostly it's either using Topaz, or it's using On1, or it's using Nik. Those are the three different ones that we kind of, and at that point, then it becomes a combination of figuring out your masking, figuring out your blending modes, and the intensity of how you want to do those. And the key thing from a print competition or a finished piece of work mindset is, in general, whatever effect it is that you're placing on that, you don't put it on the skin tones. So, and whatever there is within the scene that is actual skin tones, you try and minimize your effect there, and you have to blend it then throughout the rest of the scene. And of course, it comes down to refinement. And refinement is something that is only gained through repeated practice. And we all like to hear about, like, have you worked harder than last year? Would you like to work less and make more money? And I got a $99 solution, and yada, yada, yada. Practice is invaluable. And you hear it sometimes, and this is a tangency, but I have a philosophy in life, and it goes like this. Some photographers say, I only pick up my camera when I'm getting paid. And oh, how that sounds so good to our ears. Heck yeah, I only want to pick up my camera when I get paid. But here in the States we have basketball players, and in the NBA, why is it that the basketball height never changes? No matter where they go, it's always the same height. They have shot tens and tens of thousands of shots, and yet before a game they still go out there and they warm up. And then the funny thing is that at halftime, they've just got finished playing for 30 minutes. They go back and they warm up again. And what you realize is it's not practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. And so until you have mastered something to where you can perfectly practice it repeatedly, that's the hallmark of being a professional. And you better be doing that outside of the time that you're getting paid, because if you can, then when you do get paid, hopefully you're getting paid more money.
Excellent answer. Love that a lot. Thank you. Tapping you on the back at this point. There you go. Take it. Okay. A couple of more kind of big ups here. Okay. So just don't let your head grow too big. Confirms my own thought. Family is the most important thing and makes it a privilege to do this job. Absolutely. Yep. I give that 100%. Amazing talk, very much the heart warming and deep. One word, amazing. Thank you for sharing your personal thoughts. So I think the personal part is, I think, a thing in the UK and Europe we actually hold on a bit too much with, and I think that's the great thing about North America, that it really does. You guys who actually talk and things, you do bring a little bit more of the storytelling and the personalizations with it, instead of us kind of Brits who are a little bit kind of, oh, it's okay, it's just cool kind of thing with it, to get on with it, do it. So yeah, that's what I was saying to you before. I was listening to you going, you can tell you've lost people. Yep. Until you lose somebody very close, you really don't know the power of a photograph.
Yep.
In my opinion, kind of thing with it. Anyway, so very well done. That. Okay.
I would just say this about loss. Loss is universal. You don't have to have lost a person. In my own life, in this particular case, just a week ago, we lost a pregnancy. And it was still early on in the process. But anybody who's ever experienced anticipation of something and then experienced disappointment, you've experienced loss on whatever level. And now you just simply have to take that, and it's what do you learn and grow from that. And it's things are going to happen in life. It's now, what are you going to do about it? And my choice is always, let's grow, let's keep going, let's get better. Yep.
I feel like a nodding dog here tonight. I do apologize. I must look weird. Anybody hasn't seen me before. It's like, what's wrong with his head? Anyway, okay, let's get back to the kind of the questions. What's the name of the app you mentioned to find your work again?
Yep, so that's Jerry Guionis's Pickpockets. I think it's called World's Best Photographs. I don't know that they really are the world's best, but I think that's what the app is. But if you search for Pickpockets, which I think is P-I-C, and then Pockets, P-O-C-K-E-T-S, or if you search for World's Best Photographs on the App Store, it'll turn up.
Brilliant.
So, and I think he has a website for it too. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Luke. And any problems, Jay, when he's back, he'll get in touch with Luke and we'll find it. We'll post it on the Academy Facebook page and things. All right. So just watch out for that as well with it.
Can I say one more thing real quick, just in
Yeah, go
terms
ahead.
of this whole idea of inspiration? I think the thing that's been the most beneficial for David and myself has really been the rest of the world. I talked a little bit about the Asians, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the European photographers and also the Australian photographers that have influenced and loved on us, because they have helped us grow just in being able to see what all they're able to do. One of the beautiful things that you have somewhat in Australia, but definitely in Europe is, you don't have to build a set. It's already there for you. You've got these amazing structures that exist. Now all it's just a matter of doing is going out to figure out how do you light it, how do you capture it, how do you tell a story. And seeing what y'all have been able to create just makes us then go into our brains to figure out, okay, how do we push ourselves? How do we try and create a scene that in some way honors what it is that you guys do? So absolutely, just would want to give all credit to our friends all over Europe and then also in Australia.
Okay, so back to a business question. I'm sorry. I imagine a premium is charged for the style of art, but do people buy into the idea as an alternative to the norm? I would assume it is less costly, especially at the time when a saturated market is devaluing our industry. Oh, that is a pessimist. Mike, naughty man.
Oh,
Okay, so
no,
we
no, no,
won't
that's
talk
good.
about that, but let's talk about premium
No,
charge and things really.
let me just answer it this way. So, okay, who do you want to market to? And this isn't the marketing class, but it's well known. So if you market to people that are in your same peer group, nobody's going to be able to, you're never going to get ahead, right? If you're going to figure out what it is that your wife, your mom, your girlfriends, your neighbors on the street would pay for something, you're never going to get ahead. You have to market to people that are higher than you on the food chain, right? And so in order to do that, they want things that are rare. They want things that are unique. They want things that they can tell that that person who creates it is inspired, because that's what they're buying is they want something that you created, your inspiration. If they wanted to go out and just get something classic mom and pop done anywhere, there's a million things to choose from, right? So you have to figure out some way of differentiating yourself, and the way you differentiate is through your ideas and then your level of execution. And so yes, the people that are attracted to us are people who have a high visual IQ. Is that going to be everyone? No. But what are the common traits of people with high visual IQs? Well, they either have resources that are discretionary or they have access to discretionary resources. And now we are simply giving them an opportunity to be able to spend that money with us. They could spend it with anyone, right? They could walk into a thing and buy a painting or do whatever. How much more important to them is it going to be able to have that actually be of their family or of their loved one? And what you find about the ultra wealthy, you hear this all the time in the States where they say, oh, you got to sell big wall portraits. I don't know any wealthy person that's ultra wealthy that buys big wall portraits, right? The biggest print you might be able to get in their home is an 8 by 10, because on their walls is real artwork, right? They don't put their family over their mantle. That's like the nouveau riche. It's like the new, whatever type people that make it all about their family. And so that's the market that we tend to go for. So even though what we produce oftentimes for them ultimately is printed in a very small format, the commissioning of that piece is where we make our profit. And so we have a flat fee in terms of here's what it's going to take for us to put forth the effort to create this thing, and then from there, then we can go through the whole selling prints or figuring out what you want to do with it. But we don't try and price it so that it's just like $150 to come in and shoot with us, and now all of a sudden I got to sell you a $4,000 wall portrait to make any money off this. So to us, the value of it is not dependent on the size of the print. The value of it is in the creation of the art.
I think that's a little bit like the commercial concept, isn't it, really? If you're a portrait wedding photographer, you've been used to many years, generations even, actually being paid for a service based on what you're actually giving them or what their actually perspective going to be sold to. But as a commercial photographer, it's actually our talent that we're being commissioned for. And then actually in addition to that will be the images that they might be buying more of because we've gone beyond our job, if that makes sense. So, and I personally see that as a big change around coming within our industry in the next 5 to 10 years, more and more, in fact, really, especially in UK and Europe. But that's a whole different night. Let's not go into that. And we'll do a cross night. It'd be great to actually do a cross night.
And we do that in our wedding work as well. We have commissions. It's a flat commission for us to shoot, And then everything else from there is, we take it from there. But I think the biggest thing you got to do is you have to sell that they're buying you. That's what they're buying.
Exactly.
It's not about what do you get. You get me. I'll give you my heart even. That's my biggest selling point when we talk to people. They go, what do I get? I go, I will give you my heart. Right? Now you can't put a price on that. And now let's talk about other things.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to end with the official kind of thing with it from Rory, in fact, who says they are true artists. Beautiful. Thanks so much for, you've shared a little of what they have to offer, and it's just amazing. Thank you so much with it. And that's kind of reiterated, Luke. So for you and David, please actually go away with warm, huggy feelings from around the world today, because we appreciate your time and things really, and it's terrific. And of course, if you want to actually have more of the men in the flesh, as it were, they will be dressed, don't worry about it, but if you want more of the men in the flesh, you've got to catch them at the convention actually in January. That's it from me to you, Luke. Absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to buy you a pint in the UK. I'm going to be at the convention anyway, kind of thing. Thanks to David for allowing you to kind of come and share everything. Give him my regards as well. Really looking forward to actually seeing all the American contingent that's coming across. I'm judging there as well, so if you said before we got going you're judging, perhaps we'll be on the same panel. And I'm not as nice as a judge. I'm not as nice as a judge. I'm really not a nice guy. I don't know why I'm actually involved in doing these things at all. But really looking forward to meeting you soon, Luke. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Good night. Thanks again, Luke. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.